There are some years in human history that are not remembered because of one single catastrophe, but because of a spine-chilling feeling that seems to settle over the entire world. It is the kind of moment when people have not fully understood what is happening yet, but deep down, they know something very big has started to move. The year 2025 carried that exact feeling, not through one massive explosion, but through a flood of scattered signals that seemed unrelated until you put them side by side and a picture appears that forces anyone to ask, are we standing at the edge of a period history has warned about again and again? Never before has the world had to face so many flashpoints at the same time. War is no longer confined to one region. It spreads like a chain reaction. Natural disasters no longer feel like rare accidents. They show up with a frequency and intensity that push beyond everything people thought was possible. Moral decline is no longer the story of one society. It is starting to look like a global pattern. The scariest part is not any one event by itself. It is that all of them are happening at once, as if an unseen hand is accelerating the heartbeat of the world. People used to believe history moved forward in predictable cycles. After crisis comes recovery, after war comes peace. But the year 2025 shattered that familiar logic. Before one war could cool down, another front flared up. Before one nation could finish counting its dead after a disaster, somewhere else sank into violence and hunger. There was no pause. There was no time to heal. The shared feeling across humanity was being pulled into a current no one could control. What started to frighten many people was not bad news itself, but the repetition of a pattern. War escalates, rumors of war spread everywhere. Nations arm themselves as if they are preparing for the worst-case scenario. People become more numb to the suffering of others. Nature answers back with a kind of fury people say they have never seen before. When you place those pieces together, they stop looking random. They begin to feel like a reminder, like an alarm bell history religion and ancient texts have described more than once. Right here, the question is no longer, what is happening? The question becomes, where are we in humanity's timeline? Some periods are born for building, but other periods exist to test. Periods when the surface-level pillars like the economy, power, and technology suddenly feel fragile, and people are forced to face a raw truth about themselves. History shows that before every major turning point, the world goes through a season of chaos when the line between order and collapse starts to blur. Many people choose to look away, telling themselves everything will be fine like it was before. But others are starting to sense that this time is different, not because each event is more catastrophic than anything in the past, but because of how they converge, pile up, and speed up. Like labor pains that ancient warnings once described. Scattered at first, then closer together, and finally impossible to reverse. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. If you feel uneasy about what is happening in the world, if you have a sense that history is entering a new chapter and you cannot find the answer, you are not alone. This video is not made to spread meaningless fear. It is made to peel back what is happening beneath the surface of daily headlines and place it inside a bigger picture, where the past, the present, and old warnings collide. Before we go further, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained so you can stay with us for deeper analysis of history, prophecy, and the signs shaping the era we are living in. Your support is what keeps this channel able to bring you higher quality, more honest content in the time ahead. Because the most important thing right now is not knowing exactly what will happen next. The most important thing is understanding that we are living in an unusual season of history. A season when everything familiar is shaking. And when the world moves into deep water, the biggest question is not which wave is coming, but whether people are ready to face the truth. This is only the beginning. and what lies ahead will force each person to make their own choice. War has never disappeared from human history. But there are periods when war is only a series of local conflicts that flare up and fade out, leaving wounds humanity believes it can heal. The picture of 2025 points to something very different. War is no longer scattered sparks. It is starting to merge into a belt of tension wrapping around the globe. What makes the world tremble is not only gunfire, but the sense that a familiar order is sliding downhill with no brakes. In Eastern Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war has entered a phase where old limits seem to have been erased. Wave after wave of airstrikes, cities swallowed by darkness, casualty numbers climbing day after day. It no longer feels shocking news. It starts to feel like a new normal. The most dangerous part is not the amount of explosives, but something invisible spreading everywhere. The fear of nuclear war. When threats are spoken out loud, when weapons with unimaginable destructive power are discussed like strategic options, the world starts living with held breath. This is no longer a war between two countries. It is a fuse that could drag the whole planet with it. At the same time, the Middle East keeps proving why it is seen as the epicenter of historic upheaval. Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and Syria are pulled into a web of overlapping conflicts where every move can trigger a chain reaction. Jerusalem is not just a location, it is a religious, political, and historical symbol that pushes everything toward extremes. An attack in Gaza is not only a military issue, it immediately sparks diplomatic shockwaves, global protests, and retaliation threats from forces across the region. The city feels like a heavy stone the entire world keeps trying to lift, and every time it touches it, it ends up hurting itself. What stands out is that today's conflicts do not happen in isolation. Hezbollah does not act alone. Iran is not standing outside. Syria is no longer stable enough to keep war from spilling across its borders. Everything links together like a chain in a plan no one wants to say out loud. Armed groups, regional alliances, and global powers are all testing each other's limits. And every time those limits are pushed further, the chance of turning back gets smaller. In Asia, tension along strategic shipping routes and massive military drills send a cold message. Peace is no longer a given. When nations prepare for conflict as if it is only a matter of time, then war has already started in the human mind. This is the phase where rumors of war become almost as dangerous as war itself, because they plant fear, paralyze reason, and push decisions toward extremes. But modern war is not only measured by maps and weapons. It is measured by the psychological impact on entire societies, families sleeping in shelters, children growing up with air raid sirens, cities living in a constant state of waiting for the next strike. When fear lasts long enough, it warps how people see the world. Suspicion replaces trust, hatred replaces dialogue, and war moves from being something outside to becoming an inner condition. What leads many people to connect what is happening with ancient warnings is not blind belief, but the terrifying similarity in the pattern. War after war, nations rising against each other, rumors strong enough to make the whole world shake. This is not spears and cavalry anymore. This is high-tech conflict where one wrong decision could unleash consequences that cannot be undone. Even more, modern war does not promise a clear ending. There is no sense that after this battle, peace will come. Instead, there is a chain of escalation where each conflict seems to clear the path for the next one. The world feels like it is standing on a slick slope, and every misstep increases the speed of the fall. The most frightening part of this picture is not the possibility of war. It is that people are starting to accept war as inevitable. When war becomes the default assumption in future planning, peace has already lost its central place in human thinking. And that moment, when the world gets used to the idea that conflict is unavoidable, is exactly when the most severe warnings begin to ring. What we are seeing is not only about weapons or territory, it is about a season when nations and individuals too must face the core question. Does humanity still have enough clarity to stop before crossing the point of no return? In the bigger picture, war is not only a sign of collapse on the outside, it is a warning that the world is moving dangerously close to a threshold. History is mentioned many times, but people rarely choose to listen. There is a kind of collapse more dangerous than bombs and earthquakes because it does not level a city overnight. It quietly destroys the spiritual foundation of an entire society. It is what happens when people stop reacting to the suffering of others. When violence stops being shocking and starts feeling normal. And the year 2025 shows a clear sign that humanity is moving deeper into that darkness. In many places, war does not only take lives, it rots basic moral standards. In long civil wars, the line between soldiers and civilians gets erased. Children are no longer protected as symbols of the future. They get dragged into the machinery of hatred and violence. Images of torture, execution, and humiliation do not appear once in a while anymore. They repeat so often that global public opinion slowly becomes hardened. The scariest part is not that evil exists, it is that people learn to live with it. When power becomes the ultimate goal, human life becomes a statistic. Decisions are not made by conscience but by interests and faction survival. People speak the language of security to justify slaughter, and the language of order to legalize oppression. In that atmosphere, mercy is seen as weakness, and cruelty is framed as necessity. Society flips its values. Evil wears the costume of righteousness, while goodness is treated with suspicion and pushed aside. This decline is not limited to war zones. It spreads into everyday life, even in countries where there are no missiles falling. People retreat deeper into extreme individualism. They love themselves so much they become indifferent to the community, chasing personal gain regardless of the cost to others. Families fracture. Social relationships become fragile. And the bond once seen as the foundation of civilization starts to dissolve. When each person only cares about themselves, society loses the ability to heal. Another alarming sign is the way people treat truth. Lying is no longer embarrassing, it becomes a tool. Truth is twisted to serve power, and when lies repeat long enough, they get accepted as another version of reality. In that environment, people stop asking what is right or wrong and start asking what is useful. That moral fog makes evil spread easily, with very little resistance. Religion and faith, instead of being a place of spiritual refuge, are in many places exploited or distorted. Some societies use faith as a banner to justify violence. Others turn religion into a political weapon, draining the original meaning of humility and love. When sacred values are dragged down to serve worldly ambition, people do not only lose faith, they lose the moral compass that once guided them through the darkest chapters of history. What makes people connect this reality to ancient warnings is not any single phrase, but the shape of the whole picture. A time when people love themselves above everything, despise law, betray natural bonds, grow cruel, and hate what is good. This is not describing one society. It is a global direction that is becoming harder to deny. Moral decay is no longer the exception. In many places, it is becoming the new standard. When humanity collapses inside, war becomes easier and peace becomes a luxury. A society that loses empathy cannot stop violence. It feeds violence through indifference. This is the most dangerous loop. Violence creates numbness, and numbness clears the way for even greater violence. What is worth reflecting on is that this decay does not arrive overnight. It happens step by step through small compromises of conscience. First comes silence in the face of evil, then acceptance, and finally complicity. History shows that the greatest catastrophes are not only caused by the wicked, but also by the majority no longer being awake enough to resist. In the larger picture of this era, moral collapse is not a side detail. It is at the center of every other crisis. War and disasters can destroy the world outside, but the corrosion of human nature is what makes the world impossible to save. And when people lose the ability to distinguish good from evil and right from wrong, every warning, whether it comes from the past or the present, becomes more urgent than ever. There are times in history when nature seems like a silent backdrop to tragedies caused by human hands, but there are also seasons when the earth, the sea, and the sky step out of the background and become part of the story. The year 2025 strongly resembles the second kind of season. Nature is no longer standing on the sidelines. It appears with a force that makes people stop, look up, and ask, what is happening to this world? For decades, people got used to explaining disasters in scientific language. Earthquakes come from fault lines, wildfires come from dry climate conditions, storms and floods come from extreme weather cycles. Those explanations are not wrong, but what made 2025 feel different was not one cause. It was the frequency, the intensity, and the simultaneous nature of the events. When the ground shakes violently in one place already torn by civil conflict, when fire consumes some of the richest cities on Earth, when the sea pushes inland with a force beyond every emergency plan, the question becomes more than why. It becomes why all at once. In Myanmar, a country already exhausted by violence and division, the earth suddenly roared. The earthquake did not only collapse homes and ancient structures, it shattered the last sense of safety for people who had already been living without stability. When fires broke out after the shaking, when black smoke covered the sky, people were not only witnessing a natural disaster, they were witnessing compounded suffering, trapped between violence caused by humans and a force of nature no one could resist. In that moment, every idea of control felt meaningless. On the other side of the planet, Los Angeles, a symbol of wealth, entertainment, and cultural power, was swallowed by fire. Upscale neighborhoods, streets once glowing with lights, turned into ash. Fire did not care about wealth, fame, or influence. It spread fast and fiercely, breaking through defenses people believed were more than enough. The sky turned red, ash fell like rain, and a familiar city became unrecognizable in just days. For many, this was not only an environmental disaster, it was a psychological shock. If even the world's power centers are this fragile, then where is truly safe? In Australia, the sea no longer felt like a peaceful boundary between land and ocean. Violent storms pushed water deep into coastal cities, sweeping away homes, roads, and livelihoods for hundreds of thousands. Waves thundered as if carrying an ancient fury, throwing the whole nation into emergency mode. When rivers broke their banks, when wildlife appeared in flooded neighborhoods, people were forced to admit they are not the unquestioned masters of this planet. What all these disasters share is not only the scale of destruction, but the spiritual and psychological mark they leave behind. Disasters today are not just the story of poorer places with weaker infrastructure. They strike directly at places once viewed as symbols of stability and prosperity. That shakes a deep modern belief that technology, money, and science can shield humanity from every threat. When that belief breaks, people face a hard truth. We are far more fragile than we think. In ancient texts, nature was never only scenery. The earth shaking, fire burning, smoke rising, and seas roaring are described as warning signs, wake-up calls for humanity when it goes too far. What makes many people today uneasy is not a perfect match in detail, but the spirit of those descriptions. Nature does not rage for no reason. It reacts when imbalance reaches a level it can no longer bear. What is worth thinking about is that instead of stopping to listen, people often rush to repair and go back to normal. After each disaster, the most common question is, how do we recover as fast as possible? Not, what do we need to change? That rush makes the warning meaningless, and the next disaster arrives even more severe. In the picture of 2025, nature feels like a magnifying mirror. It reflects everything humanity has done: uncontrolled extraction, endless greed, and the pride that says we can dominate everything. When that mirror shatters through earthquakes, wildfires, and floods, the shards do not only cut into the land, they cut into humanity's illusion. If war reveals human violence against each other, disasters reveal human limits before forces greater than ourselves. And when both are happening in a short span of time, the message becomes clearer than ever. The world is sending signals no one can ignore. The question is no longer whether disasters will continue. The question is whether humanity is awake enough to understand that what is happening is not only random, but a severe warning that history is turning a page. When all the pieces are on the table, war spreading, human nature collapsing, nature raging, the question becomes more than whether the world is changing. It becomes where we are standing inside that flow. There are moments in history when people only need to look around to know they have crossed an invisible boundary. No one announces that boundary, but everyone can feel it. Many people see the year 2026 as a hinge point like that, not because of a rigid prediction, but because everything feels compressed to the point it cannot keep going the same way. In ancient texts, decisive eras rarely arrive in one sudden strike. They are usually preceded by a sequence of signs that grow clearer and closer together. First come disturbances that still seem manageable, then overlapping crises, and finally the moment humanity has to face the truth that the old order no longer fits. What makes many people anxious is not each individual event, but the sense that the world is moving very fast toward a threshold where every familiar solution starts to fail. The Bible carries a unique depth in how it treats time. Time is not only a way of counting years, it is a way of seeing history as a process with purpose. 6 days of labor before a day of rest become an image for 6,000 years of human history before entering a completely different stage. Even if that timeline remains debated, what stands out is that more and more signs suggest we are near the end of a long cycle. Not so people can guess the exact day and hour, but so they understand time is not endless, and every season comes with its own responsibility. In that larger picture, the year 2026 rises as an important psychological threshold. Not because it will definitely mark the start of one single event, but because it gathers too many alarm signals at once. Fragile agreements signed under global tension. Promises of peace spoken while military preparations continue. History has seen many moments when people believed they had reached stability, only to discover that was the beginning of a darker phase. That blind confidence is often the most dangerous thing of all. What matters is that warnings are not meant to spread hopeless fear. They are not calling people to panic or abandon daily life. Instead, they aim at a deeper question. If the world is truly entering a harsh season of testing, what is the strongest foundation? When economies fall, when power shifts, when disasters and war threaten at the same time, what will people hold on to? The answer ancient texts give is not stockpiling wealth or chasing power, but spiritual preparation. That is the process of looking inward, facing what has gone off course, and choosing to return to basic values: humility, repentance, mercy, and wakefulness. In an unstable world, a steady inner life becomes the one thing that cannot be stolen. Many people ask if everything is already set, what choices do we have? But warnings do not say our actions are meaningless. They insist that in hinge moments, personal choices matter most. History is not only written by empires and superpowers, it is also written by how each person responds to crisis. Some choose fear and despair, others choose wakefulness and change. In this light, the year 2026 is not a verdict, it is a severe reminder. It asks a question no one can avoid. If this really is a transition in history, what kind of spirit will we carry into it? Will we keep living as if everything will stay the same, or will we stop and correct our direction? Ancient teaching has often said people are not called to guess dates, but to live ready. Ready does not mean panicked. It means awake. It does not mean escaping the world. It means facing it with a conscience that has been illuminated. When the world outside shakes, preparation inside becomes the line between collapse and hope. If 2025 felt like the first wake-up bell, the time ahead may be when that bell rings louder than ever. And when it rings, each person will have to answer the final question for themselves. Are we only spectators swept along by history? Or are we awake enough to pass through this hinge moment with a faith that is tested but not crushed? The biggest lesson from this whole picture is simple. We cannot control the flow of history, but we can always control how we stand inside it. When instability becomes the new normal, wakefulness becomes a survival choice. Wakefulness so we do not get dragged by fear. Wakefulness so we do not lose our humanity in chaos. Wakefulness so we remember that wealth, power, and status are fragile, while mercy, humility, and faith are what can hold a person up in the harshest seasons. Applying this to everyday life does not require dramatic or extreme actions. It begins with small, real choices, slowing down to weigh right and wrong, refusing to become numb to other people's pain, holding to moral principles even when society around you is sliding. It is also the moment each person should look again at their spiritual life, ask questions about faith, purpose, and what truly carries lasting value. If this content is touching your thinking, if you want to go deeper into history, prophecy, the signs of the times, and how people can stay awake in instability, join the Prophetic History Explained community. This is where we learn, discuss, and reflect together on issues that are not only about the news, but also about the soul and the direction of each person in a turbulent era. And do not forget to subscribe to support Prophetic History Explained so we can keep producing deeper, more honest, more thoughtful videos in the time ahead. Your support is not only a subscription, it is a contribution to a journey of truth, wakefulness, and hope in the middle of uncertain signs in history.